Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 636. And today's date is April 7th, 2015. And the title of this episode is The Economic Collapse is Starting to Surface in U.S. Cities. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand a lot of things are happening with Greece at this time. We realize there's a payment coming up on April 9th. We understand right now Greece is saying to Germany, hey, you know something? You owe us about 278 billion euros from World War II reparations. That is more than the 240 billion that we owe you. So actually, you owe us money. And of course, we can see what they're doing right now. They're trying to use this as leverage. Will they get that money from Germany? I don't know. But we can see they're also using Russia as leverage. We have to remember that Cyprus is going to be meeting with Putin on Wednesday. And there is a chance that the Greek might maneuver and try to pivot towards Russia. Because you have to remember Putin extended his hand and said, you know something, we might be able to remove the ban, you get out of the Eurozone, and we can help you out financially. We can spur economic growth. We can help your banks. And we can see right now Greece is kind of setting themselves up for this because they redesigned the drachma. They said they were going to nationalize their banks. And they're using this to threaten the EU at this point. And we have to understand, if they do leave the Eurozone, it's a default. But don't worry. The banks, Wall Street, they've already decided how they're going to handle this. And we have to remember the credit default swaps involving Greek debt, they are the same kind of financial instruments that triggered 2008 disaster. As the negotiations over the write-down of Greek debt unfolded, one of the big questions that seemed to be hovering over all the markets was who bought the credit default swaps on the Greek debt and who would owe the big sums to cover the CDS obligations if there were a default. And what happened was there was a special committee that governs credit default swaps. They got together and said the Greek bailout, a write-down of 50% of the value of the Greek debt, is voluntary and thus does not trigger the contractual terms of the credit default swaps. That means the companies that sold the CDSs will not have to cover the losses they had insured, the decline in value of the Greek bonds. So, wait a minute. Who votes on this committee? And who is this committee? Where did this come from? Guess where this entire committee was created? It was created by Wall Street, the banks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, UBS. There were no governments, no government entities included this in all. The banks just decided, oh wait, it's voluntary, they defaulted, we don't have to do anything, we're out, we're good to go. Nobody has to pay, okay? You don't have to pay, we're fine. I mean, look what's going on right here. The banks are making decisions on their own. They are running everything at this point. We are under control of the central banking system, the banksters. And this is not just throughout Europe, it's in the United States, the Fed, it's in Canada, Australia, UK. They are controlling everything, and basically all they do is they just change the rules whenever they want. And of course, whenever they change the rules, it benefits them only. Period. It doesn't benefit anyone else. If anyone else tried to do this, oh no, they would not be allowed. We see in the UK, the economy is not going as well as everyone thinks. Actually, what we're seeing now throughout Europe, in the UK, Canada, Australia, United States, the economies, we are slipping into a depression. People are saying we're slipping into a recession. No, we've never left the recession. Actually, we're slipping into a deep, deep depression. We've been in a depression, now we're slipping even further, and it's moving towards a collapse. That's what we're seeing right now. In the UK, more than half of UK people between the ages of 20 to 45 are currently not saving money to buy a home. This is coming from Halifax Bank's Generation Rent 2015 report. 57% of those polled for the banking chain said they were not saving to own their own home. The main reasons to give up the hope of owning a home is the amount of money they have to put down. They don't make enough, they can't save enough, and they don't have the money to put down on this. They're also saying that the high property prices and low income is also a problem. Over 80% of the people between the age of 20 and 45 living in London say they will never be able to buy a place to live. We also see in the UK, and the Financial Times is reporting this, they are saying that the British economy is a ticking time bomb. So what's the problem? Quite simply, the key numbers are terrible. According to the OECD, after 5 years of austerity, the UK's budget deficit is 5.3%, down from 11.2% in 2009. In other words, it has gone from being close to a meltdown situation to completely disastrous. Since the government is spending more than it earns, it is hardly surprising that it is borrowing more and that the debt to GDP has risen from 68.95% in 2009 to 93.30% in 2013, according to OECD figures. And we can see right now the people are struggling. People can't purchase homes in the UK. Stores are closing in the UK, just like in Canada, just like in the US. And we see here in the United States, the situation is not getting better whatsoever. For many Americans, the rise in food and housing prices is a tough squeeze. That's because even in an era with low overall inflation, low-income Americans spend a disproportionate share of their money on food and housing. New data from the Labor Department show the extent of the discrepancy. The bottom 10% of Americans by income devote 42% of their spending to housing and an additional 17% to food, nearly 60% of their total spending, according to the Consumer Expenditures Survey. By contrast, the wealthiest 10% of Americans dedicate only 31% of their spending to housing and 11% to food, closer to 40% of total spending. And we can see, yes, this is true because those people who are having a tough time making it, who are receiving a certain amount of dollars, it goes to housing and food, and they have a little bit left over. When something goes wrong or prices go up with food, they notice it right away because they don't have that extra money. The wealthier people don't care because they have a huge amount of disposable income, so they don't feel like they're spending as much because they still have the money and it really doesn't hit them as hard. When someone is making it day to day to day and you're paying for something and it goes up by $1 or $2, it really affects your budget and it makes it harder to continue on. And you try to figure out ways where you can cut back even further. And before you know it, you can't cut back anymore. You just run out of things to cut back on. And this is the big, big difference. So when people are out there saying, oh, there's no inflation, I see nothing going on. Well, all I see is products getting smaller. I see prices going up. And if they're not going up, the products are getting smaller. So you're really getting less for the same amount of money. So in reality, the prices have gone up. You see it with cereal. You see it with ice cream. You see it with crackers. You see it with napkins. You see it with a lot of different products. And a lot of these companies are shrinking everything. And we have to remember, people are still being laid off. Companies are looking at their bottom line saying, listen, we're not receiving the profits that we once had. We're going to have to let people go. We're going to have to reorganize. And we see Viacom right now. They are announcing layoffs. They haven't given a number, but they're looking to cut about $785 million. And we can see that once the number comes out, there's going to be more people out of work. We see Gemini Cares Incorporated. They are laying off 700 people. This is continuing. Stores are continually closing and laying off people. Manufacturing has not picked up. The Baltic Dry Index is declining once again. We're at 583 points. That means the raw material is not needed to produce goods in the factory because there's no one out there who is purchasing at this time. And this is a huge, huge problem. I mean, we're going into the springtime now, into April. We're in April. We're going into May. And the Baltic Dry Index has gone nowhere. It's bumped up a little bit, come down, but it is really, really low compared to the other years. Last year, it was around 1,500 points. The year before that, around 1,200. Look where we are right now. And we're going to go through spring, summer. Retail, disaster. We went through the good time. That was the holidays, and it was a bust. We see in Baltimore, another city where people don't have the money to pay their bills. 25,000 customers are looking to have their water shut off because of unpaid bills. We saw this in Detroit. This collapse scenario is starting to spread across the country. It's going city to city. When did you ever hear unemployment at 5.5% and you see already 2 cities where they're threatening to shut off the water to thousands upon thousands of people who cannot make their payments? Does this look like a recovery to anybody? No, it doesn't. It looks like we're heading into a depression, a collapse. Already in California with the drought, with no water in the region, we see they're cutting back for the people, not for the corporations, not for the water bottling industry, not for the fracking, but the everyday people. They're telling them to cut back. But the companies, they can continually pumping the water out and receiving the water. I mean, look what is going on here. Again, corporations will do whatever they possibly can to help themselves. The people, doesn't matter, they can suffer. We don't care. And we see this happening all over the place, especially with the banks. Look what they have done. They write amendments to place into Congress. They haven't passed. It benefits them only, not the people. They created the bail-in documents to benefit themselves, not the people. We see that they're already set up for the credit default swaps. If things should go south, they're just going to ignore it, basically, and pretend it just doesn't exist. Nobody has to pay. Everything will just stay the way it is. We see the Treasury Department has frozen the debt, and for 21 days now, the debt has been at 18 trillion and change right now. It has not moved. So what they're trying to tell us is that they're not spending anymore or adding to it, but you know they really are. The IMF is out there, and they are saying that the economic growth may be disappointing to many. We see that developing and emerging economies for the next few years, it's not going to be good. No, it's going to be a disaster. Whenever the IMF comes out there and tells you that, oh, look, we're looking at a 1.6 GDP growth, oh, we're looking at a 2, you can take that number and just put a little minus sign in front of that. And that's what's going to happen. We see this with all the economies and all the countries they've predicted, and everything turned out to be the opposite. Hey, the IMF told us that Greece is absolutely fine once they receive the first tranche of debt. Everything's solved. The countries is in a projected recovery. Really? They said that about France. They said that about Italy. They said that about Spain, Portugal. Ukraine. Their leaders were looking at this saying, okay, everything the IMF says is not true. The Ukrainian economy is completely falling apart, and the IMF was out there saying, no, things are going to be getting better. They've gotten worse. We see more and more countries bypassing the dollar. Turkey and Iran are going to switch to transactions in their national currencies. They're not even going to use the dollar. We see Russia and Vietnam. They are going to use their local currencies. Everyone is getting away from the dollar completely. And we have to remember, this year, the IMF is going to look at the yuan to see if it meets the reserve status. And of course, U.S. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew says the Chinese yuan is not ready to be included in the basket reserve currencies, and they need to have further reforms, and they're saying whatever they possibly can, because you have to remember, the U.S. did not remove their voting rights from the IMF like they said they were going to do back in 2010. They were going to give more of the emerging economies more voting power. They didn't do it because they knew what was happening here. They understood that the dollar was collapsing, and they didn't want to give away these voting rights. They see that the yuan has been built up. They see that the ruble and Russia's economy has been getting stronger, and the U.S. economy has been declining. Right now, Germany and France are supporting the idea of making the yuan a reserve currency. The IMF, Christine Lagarde, said that, yeah, it might be right now a good time to make the yuan a reserve currency. A currency that is already a settlement currency is in which a people keep in their savings. So if countries and people start to keep the yuan renminbi in their savings, the IMF doesn't have to say it's a reserve currency. By default, it becomes a reserve currency because people are holding on to it because they trust it. They keep it in reserve. So we can see right now that the United States government central bankers, they realize that the dollar is collapsing. They realize it's the end game. And if the yuan starts to displace the dollar sphere will diminish and dollar supplies will turn out to be excessive. As a result, the dollar rate will start to fall. And countries and people will say, why do we need the dollar? We don't. We don't have to hold it in reserve. And you know what happens when people don't hold it in reserve? It floods back to the United States. And if people aren't holding it in reserve, it ceases to be a reserve currency. And we are seeing this right now. More and more countries are bypassing the dollar. They don't want it. It's toxic. And they realize the U.S. government central bankers are pushing war as hard as they possibly can because there is no alternative. They don't care who's it's with as long as they can get a war started. Now we understand Obama created that new executive order on cybercrime, and we realize that there's problems with it, and we know what he's trying to do here. We know that CISA was not pushed through. It was not voted on yet. It's still pending. They tried to hype it up with all these cyber attacks with Neiman Marcus, Target, and everything like that. And these were all surface attacks. They weren't deep attacks, and most of the information that was leaked out you could have gotten anywhere. And of course they said, oh yeah, it was a credit card breach, but they never really proved that to the people. They just mentioned it to make everyone believe that this is what happened. But Section 1, Section B, allows the Secretary of the Treasury, in consultation with the Attorney General and Secretary of State, to make a determination that a person or an entity has materially provided technological support for or goods or services in support of any of these malicious attacks. That is very broad in general. And we can see right now, most people think, oh, this is for other countries, other people outside the country. But when we look at it closely, there are concerns because this section, it doesn't say where it takes place. Who is involved with this? It could be people or organizations inside the country. And this section also brings up constitutional process concerns that if it were to apply to people protected by the U.S. Constitution, it could violate the Fifth Amendment right to due process. And we can see right now that they don't care about the rights of the people. They want to go after anybody that is leaking any type of information, that is trying to put the truth out there. If they can use this to close down websites, they will do it. And you can see right now, they're becoming desperate. They realize that this system is crashing. And when we look around the country and we look around the world, we see that every day it gets worse and worse. It's not getting better. And this is why London ordered the water cannons. This is why there's a European police that can be dispatched to any European country to help out in the situation. This is why in Spain they're training their officers for civil disobedience. This is why they implemented all the draconian laws that take away the rights from the people, that could shut down sites they don't want people to look at. This is why they're having Jade Helm here in the United States. This is why they're trying to nationalize the police force. This is why they're setting up cages to say this is where you have free speech. This is why they're continually doing all of this. Because they realize that the system is crumbling and breaking apart. And they realize that once it does, people are going to be freaked out. And there's going to be rioting. And they are very nervous that people will look at the governments and the central banking system and say, you are the cause. We need you out of here. This is what they're really preparing for. They're hoping to have some type of an event and war before this happens because they do not want to be blamed for this. And this is why you see all of this happening at this point in time. Now, we understand that Russia and Armenia, they're very close, and we see Armenia right now is looking to coordinate its foreign policy with Russia. They figured, it's time to get closer, put it down in writing, and this is exactly what they're doing. Russia right now, along with China, they're going around the world, they're making deals with all different nations, economic deals. They're not bringing in their military, they're not setting up bases, they're talking to the countries. They're saying, listen, we want to help out with your economic situation, because this is a system that is being born, and this is what it looks like when it's being born. You see deals all around the world. When a system is dying, it looks like the United States. Military on every corner of the world. War happening everywhere. They only deal in absolutes, black and white. There's no gray area. There's no room for peace. It's a push to war. That is it. We see in Ukraine. Ukraine is at war still. Even though there's the Minsk II agreement, they're still at war. Basically, Kiev really wants the southeastern people to surrender. That's what they're shooting for, because everything they're doing is stalling and maneuvering away from the Minsk II agreement. And we see already with all the laws that Poroshenko is putting into place, like martial law, and all Russian people will be imprisoned in camps. We can see right now they are getting ready for something major, very major, which is coming up. And we see that by him continually avoiding the Minsk agreement, he is just stalling for time. That's it. And as of right now, we can see that they continually come up with laws that are not for the people whatsoever. I mean, right now, the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesman told reporters on Tuesday that Ukraine will not be sending any representatives to Moscow in May to celebrate victory, noting that under conditions of Russian aggression against Ukraine, there can be no participation of Ukraine representatives in events in Moscow. And if anyone from Ukraine does go, they are blacklisted. And they will blacklist world leaders heading to Moscow for Victory Day. They're becoming desperate. We see the OSCE continually reporting violations by the Kiev government, where they're continually shelling, where they're not abiding by the Minsk II agreements. Observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, have reported that Ukrainian forces are moving new heavy weaponry to the buffer zone in eastern Ukraine. SMM listed 4 100mm anti-tank guns and 4 MTLB armored tractors. The OSCE monitor said that not all heavy weapons subject to pullout had been completely withdrawn from the buffer zone. Thus, according to the report, they observed 3 T-64 tanks and 2 more T-64 tanks were seen moving towards the contact line. They are getting ready, and all they're doing is taking their heavy weaponry and just shuffling it around. They're not removing it. That's all they are doing at this point in time. We see the United States continually setting up bases around the world. The government of Spain will now authorize the presence of the U.S. Marine Corps contingent at an air base in the south of the country for a third consecutive year. Spain extended the agreement by 1 year and agreed to increase the total number of U.S. soldiers to 850. Madrid and Washington have been in talks over the U.S. request for a permanent Marine presence at one of the bases in Spain, and they want to bring in around 3,500 soldiers. Right now, the U.S. has about 66,000 soldiers which are currently deployed in European countries. Sounds like the Roman Empire, where they had garrisons all over the place, spread out all over the place. And as we know, the U.S. government central bankers have been pivoting to the Pacific to contain and control China. And we can see this is becoming more and more evident as time goes on. The United States plans to locate in the future 60%, and we mentioned this before, of its military fleet in the Pacific Indian Ocean area. 60%. The newest and most capable weapon systems will go first to the Asian Pacific region. On Monday, Ashton Carter begins his trip to Japan, South Korea to promote and strengthen defense relations with those countries. In May 2015, Carter will also visit Singapore and India to enhance their military partnership. They are getting ready to establish bases, move military assets into each and every one of these countries. At least that's what they're going to try to do. Because they need to contain and control China in the Pacific. They need to contain and control Russia in the Eastern Europe area. This is why they're not taking down the missile shield at this point. That's why they're keeping it up. It had nothing to do with Iran. It was really meant for Russia all along. Iran does not have any type of nuclear weapon. The NPT, the IAEA inspections have absolutely shown nothing there whatsoever. There's been no proof. There's been no documentation. Even Mossad of Israel says, yeah, they don't have a nuclear weapon. But don't worry, the Senate, who is controlled by mostly Israel because they give them a lot of funding to their campaign, they are going to create legislation that will counter the peace deal with Iran. And you have to remember, the P5+1 group of countries is the United States, France, Russia, China, and the United Kingdom, plus Germany. It's just not the United States. And the sanctions are being held, of course, with the UN. If UN says, okay, we remove the sanctions are gone. But again, the US does have their own sanctions, but over all the other countries have no sanctions and they're removed, they can do business with Iran. If the United States keeps the sanctions, guess what? The United States can't do business. And will the United States then sanction those countries who are doing business with a sanctioned company in Iran? Think about that for a second. So if Germany or Russia's already saying Germany, France, Spain, they decide to do business with Iran, with a sanctioned company. Does that mean now the U.S. is going to sanction those countries? It's a problem that we're in. Netanyahu's out there saying that part of the Iran deal, it should be that Iran will recognize Israel. Well, Iran said it will recognize Israel 1 second that Israel recognizes Iran. But forget that for a minute. Israel is not part of the P5+1 deal. They don't have a say. It's meaningless in what they're trying to do. And we have to remember, the deal that was struck with Iran is all the stuff that's not being broadcasted out there. And that is putting the US dollar into Iran and having it used on the natural resources, which is the oil of the country, setting up a central bank. Because what did the US actually gain by this? If we're just talking about nuclear, not much, because they were already in line with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They were already in line with the IAEA. There were no violations. They weren't creating a nuclear weapon. So what did they gain? The only thing that they're going to gain is access to what they have in the country, which they always wanted. And that's why this deal is not about nuclear. Now, China is calling out to the world saying, listen, we need a ceasefire in Yemen. We call on all sides to cease fire as soon as possible in order to avoid more casualties among civilians. China also hopes that all sides will implement the relevant resolutions of the UN Security Council and initiatives of the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf and solve the crisis by political dialogue, restore internal stability and legal order in Yemen in the short term. And we can see, as of right now, the United States government, central bankers, Saudi Arabia and the coalition forces, they want the Houthis to surrender, period. And they want them controlled. And they want to put back the puppet government inside of Yemen. And they will not negotiate peace at this point in time. We see the coalition forces are continually dropping arms to help the pro-puppet regime forces. And a lot of these weapons are being captured by the Houthis. They are taking them and using them. We also see that the Saudis are not hitting military targets. They're hitting oil storage facilities. They're hitting civilian areas. And right now, some of the airstrikes hit oil tanks belonging to a Yemeni state oil company. Oil storage was used to deal with any shortage of crude oil that may arise on the domestic market. And we can see what they're trying to do is get rid of all that oil. They have no oil coming in, and it will make it very difficult for the Houthi people to fight without oil, of course, to maneuver their tanks, their machinery, and other things they have. Yesterday we reported on how the Houthis might have captured the airport and seaports, and it looks like it is confirmed. The Houthi people have seized the port and international airport in Aden. We also have to understand that as the Saudis and the U.S. coalition forces continually hit the civilian areas, the civilians now are getting angry, upset. They're siding with the Houthis, saying, you know something, they're just attacking anybody and punishing the people in Yemen for getting rid and going along with the Houthis and throwing out the puppet regime. And it seems like right now they're teaching them a lesson. And we will hit the civilian areas to show you, you do not do that. You stay in line. And it seems that is exactly what's going on right now. And at first, Saudi Arabia said, listen, we're not going to let humanitarian aid in. We will tell you when the time is right. And I guess from around the world and all the pressure, they had to let some flights in with humanitarian aid. The International Committee of the Red Cross first plane with humanitarian aid has landed in the Yemen capital. and they have received permission from the international coalition led by Saudi Arabia to send 2 planes to Yemen. The first plane was planned to arrive on Monday, but the ICRC representative said they had some problems, and we see the other plane has landed, and they should be distributing humanitarian aid to all the people who need it. And it looked like from the world there was a lot of pressure. Now, Russia is continually evacuating, India's evacuating, China's evacuating, Turkey is evacuating. The only country right now that is not evacuating its people is the United States. Pretty much they said, hey, you're on your own. Good luck. We gave you the warning. Get out if you can. What does this tell you? All other countries are helping their people, and the U.S. is not helping whatsoever. Right now, we understand the Saudis, the U.S. puppet forces, are getting ready for a ground invasion. We see the Saudis are asking Pakistan to help out. They need aircraft, warships, soldiers to join its offensive against the Houthis. This is signaling a plan that they're getting ready to expand this war. And the U.S. is expediting armed deliveries to the Saudi-led coalitions that is battling the people in Yemen. Pentagon spokesman Colonel Steve Warren confirmed the U.S. is supplying its Arab allies as the fight in Yemen rages. They won't tell us what type of equipment they are giving them, but they are giving them equipment. They're also helping them with logistical. They're giving them intel. And we can see right now the war is on, and they're hoping that this spreads because they want World War III. This is what the central bankers, U.S. government, are pushing for. Right now, Obama has approved more arms sales, over $169 billion, than any U.S. administration since World War II. So much for the Nobel Peace Prize for peace. We are at war, and it is spreading. And they will continually provoke until we get the Big Bang and the announcement comes on that the world is at war. World War II didn't start out that, right out like everyone was fighting. It started out small. It built up. More countries got involved. We're going to see the same exact thing. The only difference now is that the weapons are much, much more advanced. The weapons can reach the United States. Missiles can reach the United States. So the United States will not be isolated from this war. And if these government officials believe that we will, they don't understand what's going on here. Because we understand that this isn't a small country like Yemen, Iraq. When they get the big players in, like Russia and China, they have weapons that match the United States weapons, or some are even better. And we can see right now, this is not going to turn out well for anybody. And if these government officials want war so badly, show us you are a leader and show us why we need to go to war. Go to the front line with your rifle, your fatigues, and bring your family. This will show us that you really want war. So all these people that are talking war, don't point at other people to send. Send yourself, send your families. And maybe then the people will be behind you. But let me just tell you, we are dealing with cowards. They would never, ever do that. They want everyone else fighting for them. And behind them is the central bankers who are orchestrating all of this. And we see out in England, it seems that hackers calling themselves the Moroccan Islamic Union, MAL, have launched an audacious cyber attack on the Department of Food, the Environment and Rural Affairs, hijacking its air quality page. And this happened around 7 a.m. on Tuesday morning. It became apparent that someone had replaced the existing page with a photo of late Iraqi despot Saddam Hussein and a garbled warning. It's time to remind the British government what you did with Saddam Hussein will not forget, and we are ready to sacrifice with everything, and is not to give up Iraq and stay alert for the coming. So it looks like they are getting ready for a false flag event inside of England. And this will spread because what they're trying to do is get the people all riled up to believe that we need to go to war. And we will see these events occur. We see in Washington, D.C., there was a power outage. And of course, the U.S. government came right out and said, no, this was not terrorism. And it looks like there was an explosion at the power plant. They're still investigating this. But this is something that everyone needs to understand and notice. That when they push this event to get people to go along with war, to cover up this economic collapse, they will use tactics like blowing up a power plant. They did this out in California. It was like a trial run where they had people with weapons. They were taking down the power plant. We see in Washington there was an explosion, and it's very easy to bring the whole system down. We can also see they'll use cyber attacks. Of course, this will be an inside job. It will be our government officials convincing us that it was another country or group. And as we go forward, at that point in time, we have to say, listen, we know what's going on here. We are not going to war. You have to remember, they tried to get us into war back in August of 2013. Who stopped it? Putin. We would have had a war going on at that point in time. Right now in Ukraine, they tried to start another war. Who stopped it? Putin, once again. Not once, but twice. Will it hold? We don't know. We see a war in Yemen going on. Who is calling for a ceasefire? Putin and China. Russia and China right now. So Russia and China are trying to calm the situation down. The United States government central bankers are trying to provoke war. They're not listening. They're just continually ongoing, non-stop. And everyone needs to be prepared for what is coming. I mean, if the power does go out, make sure you have extra batteries. Make sure you have supplies. Make sure you have toiletries. Make sure you have medicine. Make sure you have food. Make sure you have cash on hand. Make sure you have gold or silver to protect your wealth. Make sure you have a weapon to protect your family. Because we can see from everything that we've been looking at, they're almost there. The illusionary numbers with the real economic indicators are so far apart right now. They realize they can't keep this going much longer. This is why we will most likely see the biggest push you have ever seen coming up in the next couple of months to get war started. If you notice, and we go back through time, each time they try to get something started between the spring and summer months. Every single time. And they're going to try it once again. They're going to push as hard as they can to get something going. They have the authorization for war still pending, not moving anywhere. Congress doesn't even want to look at it. And you know, when they want this thing to go forward, what will they do? They will create an event. They will convince everyone we have to go to war. And these are the things that we need to look at. We need to look at Jade Helm that is going on between July and September. As we get closer to September, we need to see what is going on with this. Listen, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.